Hey everyone, and welcome back to the last episode of A Millennial Mind this year. I cannot believe how much has changed this year, and I'm going to take you all the way back to January. All the way to now to explain my journey and everything that's been going on. So I'm going to start with going through each of the months and telling you everything that I got up to within that month. And I'm also going to be sharing my lessons, all of my achievements, all of my failures, all of the crazy things that have happened this year along the way. Before we get into it, if you haven't already, please do me a really quick favor and press subscribe. Only 4% of you that follow me on Instagram are subscribed to my YouTube channel. And the more subscribers we get, the bigger and the better the podcast gets. So let's start with January. In January this year, I had just under 5,000 followers. So I know I had 4,000 something because one of my first guests this year was Nisha. And I remember when I released Nisha's episode, she DM'd me and said, "Congratulations for getting over 5K. Now, when I look back at that moment, I remember feeling, how can I grow? I remember asking her, how can I grow? What am I doing wrong? The start of this year, I was really unfocused. And I think looking back now, I know that it's very clear. And I was very aware of it at the time too. I remember I booked to go away in Oxford. I've also done the same this year, but I booked to go away in Oxford and I wrote down this giant mind map. Now, one of the things that I've always done is put my name in the middle and every single thing that I want to do outside, like a spider diagram, like you do when I was a kid in school. I'd started my virtual season 3 of my podcast, so they were being virtually recorded on YouTube. Virtually released on YouTube. I had the planner and I was trying to push that out as much as I could. I wanted to start vlogging, but I remember thinking, I don't want to do like random vlogs. I actually recorded a hair vlog and I never released it. I was coaching and I also had my job. So in January, I do remember feeling a little bit like, what on earth am I doing? I've got so much going on and I'm not really getting anywhere. And I remember saying that to myself, I'm not getting anywhere and I need to focus. And I also remember telling people when they would tell me, just focus on one thing. I can't focus on one thing. They're all interlinked. I definitely can't do that. What happened for me, I think, was I wasn't able to manage. I wasn't able to manage my job. I wasn't able to do the performance planner. I wasn't able to do the podcast. I wasn't able to do anything at a great level. And so I said to myself at the end of January, you need to focus. You absolutely now just need to focus on one thing. And I chose the podcast. I stopped kind of doing the performance planner. I was like, there's no point me pushing content on social media. There's no point me trying to take these photos. There's no point me trying to do anything for it. Just leave it, park it, and just focus purely on the podcast. How are you going to bring these conversations in a more aesthetic, more pleasing, more professional way to your audience? Because what was happening is I wasn't really getting much attraction, but I was having really powerful conversations. So there was something wrong in my delivery. I was having great conversations from the start. If you listen back to my podcast in the beginning, sometimes I re-listen to them because I'm talking about one of those topics, not because I'm a weirdo. But sometimes I re-listen to them and I'm like, it's a great conversation, but it wasn't aesthetically pleasing or it was just audio. So a lot of people want to watch it. When you're pushing this content on social media, you need to make sure it's in a background like this rather than somewhere at home where I was doing it with like 500 things in the background and my mum coming in every minute. Now let's go to February. February was a very big month for me that nobody really saw. It was really behind the scenes. So in February, I remember I'd finished season 3 of my podcast. And I do remember at that point thinking, what on earth am I going to do now? Should I just give up the podcast? I'm really not getting any views. I don't even think I had 1,000 subscribers on YouTube. I wasn't making any money from it. I wasn't really getting any attraction. You know, now when I look at the amount of people that share the video, I don't think anyone ever used to even share the virtual podcast apart from the guests. So I remember thinking, why am I doing it? No one's really benefiting from it. No one's feeling valued from it. So what's the point? But I do remember one thing, and I think that throughout my journey, when I've had conversations with people, the people who I've had a conversation with, they've always told me, you're going to make it. For some reason, they always would tell me, I believe in you, you're going to make it, you're a great interviewer, you ask great questions, keep going. And I do remember in February thinking, there is just so much more I want to speak about. So why don't I do a debate? Now, I can't remember when this was. I think it was the previous year. Yes, it was. It was the previous year when Reshma Saujani, obviously the whole motivation and inspiration of my whole life, the reason why I started this podcast and the reason actually why I started season 4 expectedly. It's not really a season, it's just a podcast now. I remember she took me to Oxford to go to a debate, and she was talking around big tech. I remember sitting in that debate for 2.5 hours and feeling so engaged with no tea, no coffee, no snacks, nothing, no break. And I remember feeling so engaged. And I remember thinking, wow, that is so interesting. I need to apply this to my podcast. There needs to be some healthy debate. There needs to be some discussion. It can't just be, hey, how are you? Talk me through your journey. That's amazing. You're the best. Bye. It can't be like that. We need to have some conversation. And as a child, I've always been someone who's debated anyway, everything. My parents will tell you that my whole life. I've always asked why. I've always questioned everything. So I was almost like, why am I not bringing that side of my personality out onto the podcast? So I decided to call it the Millennial Debate. Now, for this season, I said to myself, okay, your podcasts are boring to watch. I was very frank with myself. I was like, the reason I wouldn't watch my podcast is it's boring to watch. The connection isn't bad. The background looks ridiculous. Every time it's inconsistent with the lighting. The quality is crap. The sound is awful. Why are people watching? So I made a promise to myself that, okay, I'm going to give it my all. I'm just going to do 10 episodes of the Millennial Debate and we'll see how it goes. And that was what I promised myself. So I remember searching for studios, and I remember I was so excited. I was going to see a few, and I found one. I found one in Hoxton. So I found one in Hoxton, and I remember I went to go and see it. There's a reel on there if you scroll down to my Instagram, and I'm so excited to start recording. Now, the mistake I made, and I've made this mistake throughout my whole podcast, and I don't know why I never learn, is I didn't bulk record episodes. I think I got so excited about the studio that when I had one episode recorded, I just wanted to release the next one as well. So I remember recording an episode with Amira, who was so lovely. She came, we recorded an episode. I was very nervous, but we had a really powerful conversation. And I remember I was really stupid because the mic was connected to the camera. However, when I was editing the videos, I was using the video camera sound, not the mic camera sound. So, okay, now I was in a studio, but the audio was rubbish, but I had absolutely no clue. I had no clue. And now when I look back at my videos, everyone notices and they're like, did you not use the audio? And I'm like, no, I didn't. Anyway, so I recorded one episode. And I remember very, very distinctly, it was a Friday and I was at work. And I remember getting a message from Reshma. And she said, do you know who Steven Bartlett is? Now, the day before, Steven Bartlett had put up on his story, okay, I'm going to LA, who should I record with? Now, I was already going to LA for a holiday and I was already planning to record a season there, trying to reach out to loads and loads of guests already. So when I saw that he was going to LA, the reason why I didn't recommend Reshma, she lives in New York, so I didn't even think to ask her that question. Now, I remember getting that message and I remember being at work and thinking, oh my God, I cannot believe this is happening. It's absurd. The reason why it was so absurd to me is at the start of the year, I had no clue who Steven Bartlett was. I'm not joking. Steven, if you're watching this, I love you. But I really had no idea who he was. 2 of my friends sent me his article in January and said, you. And this is what I mean. Even though my podcast wasn't getting much traction, even though I wasn't really getting the views and the likes or whatever, I think because my conversations were powerful, people believed in me and therefore would continuously tell me these affirmations of, you're going to make millions from your podcast, you're going to be great, you're going to be number one, whatever it was. And it was so weird to me because I started in January listening to his podcast every single day. I'm not joking. I was listening to 2, sometimes 3 a day. I was obsessed with his podcasts. And then to get that message from Reshma to ask me if she should go on his podcast, I was jumping for joy. I could not believe it. I was in the office and I was telling all my friends that were next to me. I was like, can you believe this? I can't believe it. The dates aligned. Now, it was so weird. I was just remember thinking like, this is so bizarre. And she hadn't confirmed with me yet, but the dates were aligning with mine. On the way home that day, I remember seeing Huel in a Holland and Barrett window, which I'd never seen before. Obviously, it's my reticular activating system picking everything up. I remember then going home, putting on the TV, and I never eat dinner with my parents because they watch Coronation Street and EastEnders. Don't ask me why. It's weird. But I don't eat dinner with my parents because they watch that on some days. As I was getting my food, they are talking about Steven Bartlett on Coronation Street. And that was the one time they've spoken about him then. I was like, is this a sign? What is happening? This is so crazy. Anyway, Rashma confirmed. So I knew I was going to LA and I knew I was going to meet him. I was ecstatic. You don't understand. I was so ecstatic. And the first thing I remember thinking was, I'm going to ask him to be on my podcast. And I remember my mum and dad both saying to me, okay, yeah, great, you're going to meet him, but so what? And I was like, I'm going to ask him. And they're like, do you think he'll do it with you? And I was like, I know he will. Because I know it will sound really arrogant there, but I really think that when you listen to people online, you can tell people who are really authentic and people who are not. And because I'd listened to so many podcasts by Stephen, I knew he was a really nice guy and I knew that he really wanted to help. And I also knew that if I went in there and not like all guns blazing, asking him straight away, and I made it easy for him, why would he not help me? He absolutely could have turned around and said no, but I think I was just affirming to myself that he's someone who wants to help, so he was going to help me. So it gave me the confidence to ask. Anyway, at this moment, I do remember feeling very overwhelmed. I had just started recording in person, which meant that I had to do it on the days I was coming into work, which meant I had to bring my gym clothes, my work clothes, my podcast clothes, my work laptop, my personal laptop, and the goodie bag in. So I remember feeling like, oh gosh, this is really, like, there's so much to carry. This is a bit stressful. I have to plan everything so much. Even if I didn't go to the gym, I still felt like I had to do so much. And I remember at that point thinking, how am I going to cope? But I was so excited, I just continued to do it. Now, before I went to LA, I had a little bit of a fallout with my previous studio, which is why I'm in this studio and not the one that I originally started with. And because I had a fallout with them, and I'm not going to go into the details of why, because I had a fallout with them, I started to then panic and think, okay, I'm going to LA now. I only have 2 podcast recordings. I literally do not have a studio when I come back. And I promised myself that this year I was going to upload 1 video every week. So when I basically started in the studio, I said to myself, okay, instead of doing a season like you've made a mistake every other time, it's March, just promise that you're going to do 1 video every single week, no matter where it's from. Even if it's at home, just do 1 video every single week. So I was already thinking, I'm going to break this promise to myself. How am I going to do it? Anyway, I just said, okay, I'll deal with it when I'm in LA. I didn't have time to organize it when I was coming back because the studio kerfuffle happened like 2 days before I was going to LA. I've just realised I have 23 minutes left and we are only in March. Oh my God, I need to hurry up. So in March, everyone knows what happened in LA. I met Stephen. It was the most magical, amazing thing. I remember feeling so high after it. I remember coming back. Actually, no, let me just tell you, actually. I'm not going to rush it and I'll just do the rest at home if I can. So got to LA. I remember getting there and I hadn't prepared the questions for Stephen, by the way. I had absolutely no idea what I was going to ask him because part of me was like, I don't know if he's going to say yes. Are you going to let yourself down? Be realistic, dream big. I was having all of these different things in my head. But I remember saying to myself, prepare yourself, because if you're prepared, you can ask him good questions. If you're not prepared, you won't be able to ask him good questions. But if you're prepared and he says no, it doesn't matter. You still got to go and you still got to meet him. And that's an amazing thing you got to do. So I prepared. The night before, I was scrolling through his book. I was trying to find questions and I really did not want to ask him, tell me about your journey, tell me about Social Chain, how to start your podcast. No one cares about that. We want to understand the deeper things to ask him because we all know his journey. We all know who he is. So prepare the questions. When I got there, he was the kindest person ever to me. He was so nice and we just got along so well. So we spoke for ages. He signed my book. And then at the end of it, I asked him and I said, will you be on my podcast? And he said, yeah, sure. And I remember I had my little vlogging camera and I said, can we record it on here? And he looked at his team like this. And he said, do you want to just do it here? And I was like, I knew he was going to do that. And I told my boyfriend the day before, I think he's going to let me do that because I don't know why. For me, I just thought if that was me, I would just be like, just use it because there's no point doing it on your shitty little camera. Anyway, finished the podcast. It was amazing. I felt the happiest I'd ever felt in a long time. I know that's really lame, but I did because it was such a big moment for me to interview him and for him to say yes and for him to believe in me. It was such a big moment to have someone who's the best in your industry tell you that you're good at something that you've been questioning yourself about for so long. So I remember after that, we went for dinner with Rashma and all of her friends. And I just remember feeling so happy. We got home back to the hotel. We watched the whole podcast because I'd asked someone to record it on my phone. So we watched it on my phone. And then the next day, we went to a brunch for Rashma's book, Pay Up, which was also just phenomenal. And then we took the stupid decision to drive to Vegas, which was going to take 4 hours, but it took us 10. So that was a disaster. And also, me and my boyfriend don't really like clubbing and partying that much. We don't really love drinking. So we got to Vegas at 10 p.m. We got like a taco from like a stall downstairs and we went to sleep. The next day we went to a pool party. We went to sleep at 9 p.m. And then the following day we also went to sleep at 9 p.m. because we were so jet lagged. Then on the way back to LA, I do remember feeling really low because I was just so happy after the Stephen podcast. It's almost like the thing that he talks about of when you reach your goal and then you're like, where now? Like, what am I going to do now? I was almost like, what's the point of me being in LA? I don't have any really good guests coming up. I didn't have any really guests planned for when I was going to come back. And I remember thinking, what am I going to do? I only have 2 weeks to find a guest because I was recording a podcast with someone else there. And so I had a 2-week buffer. But I was thinking, I don't have any guests planned in the UK. I don't really know what I'm going to do. I don't really know why I'm here doing this. Okay, yeah, I got Stephen. Okay, but now what? Who cares? Like, now what? What? Not who cares, but okay, yeah, I got Stephen, but now what? How am I going to top that? I've already reached the best guest. What am I going to do now? And I remember feeling really deflated and really upset for quite a bit. And obviously when I leave any holiday, if you know me, I'm just very sad to leave. So I remember coming back feeling really upset. And I remember messaging so many people. And Harps from The Apprentice replied. Now, The Apprentice was very hot at the time. I don't think anyone had really interviewed her yet. So when she came on the podcast, this was the first podcast that we recorded in this studio. And I remember coming back and finding the studio straight away and being like, okay, great, I'm just going to record here. It was a lot more expensive than the previous one. But I remember thinking, this is really nice. It looks really good. Let me just record. Stupidly, I did not check that purple was in the background. I hate purple, but now it is my brand color. So never mind. I remember recording with Harps. I was so excited. It was such a big deal. I also remember that day was my auntie's 50th and I had to leave early to come to the studio, which is why I look a little bit like a bit of a mess. And after getting a studio where the audio was really good quality, the video was really good quality, I'm using 4K cameras, I'm paying for 3 cameras. What did I do? I didn't export the file in high quality. So I don't even know, it was like 360p FP or something. I didn't do it correctly because I didn't know what I was doing. When I came back from LA, I remember Stephen's producer said to me, if you want to up your podcast, you need to stop using iMovie and start using Final Cut Pro. So I was learning Final Cut Pro. I didn't know when you export things, you can check the quality and all of that stuff. So what do? I upload Harpreet's podcast, one of the best podcasts, really hot topic at the time, which did do really well on Instagram, to be honest, but not really well on YouTube. I upload it in rubbish quality. And I still have the file, and to this day, I still haven't uploaded it because I'm embarrassed. The reason I'm telling you the story is I'm still resistant to upload that podcast because I'm so embarrassed that I uploaded it in that time. And the comments were like, in this day and age, how can you do this? This is pathetic. Your quality is awful. What were you thinking? You don't know what you're doing. All of these things I was getting. And for Harpreet's podcast, it was the first podcast where I changed my style of interviewing. Before, I was very much like, tell me about this. Tell me about this. After Stephen's podcast and how I was so confident to ask him hard questions, I started to question myself as to why I'm not asking harder questions to my guests. But there's a balance of not making your guests feel uncomfortable and making them hate you, but also asking them the questions that no one else has asked them. Now, Harps' podcast, a lot of people thought I was very harsh. I went through all of the questions and she was really excited because she said, yours is the first podcast that you're asking me these hard questions. I'm excited to answer them. But I got loads of hate on TikTok for not supporting her, being too aggressive, being really mean and asking things in a harsh way. I wasn't. It's just because we went through the questions before and we wanted to make the podcast spicy. Anyway, I remember feeling so upset that I basically ruined that upload. And I want everyone, if you're still watching this video, to comment below and tell me to upload that video with Harpreet because I still haven't done it. But I just wanted to share that because I want to show you that I still am learning. I'm still going through these things. I still have that imposter syndrome. I still have that anxiety. I'm still worried about certain things. So we're all kind of going through this up and down together. We're all going through these journeys where no one is perfect like this. My journey has not gone like this. It's gone like this a million times. Now we're in May. I come back to the UK. So Harps' podcast, I'm got Shannon on the podcast. Now Shannon actually said yes to me before I went to LA, but we had just organised her podcast after. I was at home one day and I was feeling so low. I was just feeling really upset. I think I was finding it very overwhelming with my job because it was really hard for me to manage my job and to manage the podcast and to do all the editing and to come into the studio now. And my boyfriend called me and he said, have you seen Stephen Bartlett's LinkedIn? And I was like, no. He was like, go on it. And Stephen Bartlett had made a post about me, about how brave I was to ask the questions and the power of asking the right questions. And I remember being like, oh my God, he is just so selfless. Because, you know, at the end of the day, he had no obligation to do that for me. He did that purely to help me. And I loved the way he did it on LinkedIn, because he did upload some clips from our podcast. And he did upload the snippets that we spoke about. And he didn't put me in them. And he didn't tag me in any of them. And I remember at that time, knowing him, thinking he's done this on purpose in a very good way. Because if he had uploaded me and tagged me on Instagram, my followers would have gone up. I was on around 6,000 followers at this time. My followers would have skyrocketed, and everyone would have said it was because of him that he posted me. On LinkedIn, I didn't have a very big profile, and I maybe got like 1,000 followers from there. But what was really powerful is businesses are on LinkedIn, sponsors are on LinkedIn. Instagram is a vanity metric. So I knew him. From knowing him, I knew that he did that on purpose. And I was so grateful for him for putting it up on LinkedIn, because I really felt he was trying to help me. Even though loads of people messaged me saying, oh, I wish you tagged you on Instagram. I'm really happy he didn't, because even to this day, a lot of people think my Instagram blew up after Stephen. It didn't. For 3 months after, I still didn't get anything. I was growing slowly. I was 6K in March. I was 6.5K in April. And in June, that's when I hit 10K. So it wasn't like a massive progression after him. His podcast was incredible for me in terms of credibility, but it didn't skyrocket my followers. And I really am so grateful that he didn't kind of hand it to me on a plate on Instagram and just tag me in that post. Okay, so June. Now, this was the first time I was asked to speak at a company, and it was TSB, and someone had seen my clips on YouTube and on Instagram, and they'd also seen how much I was posting about the performance planner. So they wanted me to come in and run a workshop on goal setting. So this was a really big moment for me, because it was the first time a corporate had really asked me to come in and talk around something. I was asked to go in to speak at AIG in March, but that was really around diversity and inclusion, and that was to do with Holly. So they wanted me to speak around something different. This was the first workshop where it was around goal setting, change management, leadership. It was all these things that I'd been wanting to talk about for so long. So I was really excited. One thing I also have forgot to mention is around this time I was feeling very, very, very stressed. And I remember when I came back from LA, so around April, I had stopped going to the gym. And the pure reason for that is I had just got Soho House membership in London, and I wanted to move out. And I remember saying to myself, the only way for me to justify that membership is if I'm using the gym. Now, my gym membership was already quite expensive, so I thought, let me cut that. I'll be going into London for work, and I'll be moving into London soon anyway. So I'll just use Soho House as a gym, and that way I can justify that membership, because otherwise it's a bit ridiculous. And I use it to work and network and all of that stuff, but I wanted to justify it a little bit more in my head. So I cancelled my gym membership. However, in terms of the moving out, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but in terms of carrying my gym stuff, carrying my work clothes, carrying my podcast clothes, it was a little bit impossible unless I brought a suitcase into work every day. So I felt like I was going to the gym maybe once a week, if that, but I wasn't going anywhere near as regularly as I was before. And because I had so much going on, I really wasn't sleeping a lot as well. I'd wake up at 5, I'd work from 5 till 9 when I was working from home. And then from 6 till 10 on my podcast. And then from 9 to 6, I had my job. When I would come into the office, it was really, really, really challenging. And one of the things that I also forgot to mention, which I keep forgetting to mention things, is before I went to LA, I was invited to the Tesha event. Now, this is a really life-changing moment for me, I remember, because it was the first time I first of all was invited to like a PR event, which I was really excited about. But secondly, I was on a course at work and I was in Milton Keynes. I don't know if I should be sharing this, but I'm going to. I was at a course in Milton Keynes, and at this course, you had 4 days of learning and then 1 day of a presentation, and everyone was so hyped up about this presentation. I don't understand why. It was just a bit ridiculous. Everyone passed the course, but everyone was so hyped up about this presentation. So for 4 days, we were there. Now, during this time, our course started at 8:30 and it finished at 6:15, 6:30 every single day. I still had my podcast, so I would have to wake up at 5:30 and do my podcast till 8 in the morning in terms of the editing, the thumbnails, the caption, the tagging, the short clips, the long form, the YouTube, all of that stuff. I was trying to do it myself. as well as reaching out to the guests at the time as well. And I remember my laptop was so incredibly slow that on one day it stopped working. And I remember thinking, what on earth am I going to do? I have to get this clip out. Obviously, I'm in a workshop all day. I don't have time to check anything. So I wasn't able to post anything. I wasn't really able to do much in the day. So I'd have to do it in the morning and evening. I remember that week thinking, there is no way I could do this podcast if I had to be in the office every day. It's physically impossible. I can only do it because I work from home and I have that hour at the end of either side of it. I don't have to travel in. I can do it in my lunch break. I can take a break and it's fine. But I remember at that moment realizing I can't do this if I have to go into the office full time again. And thank God I never had to. But I remember realizing that privilege. I also remember at that time on the Tuesday getting the invitation to Tasha. The event was on Thursday, the night before the presentation in London. I had taken the train to Milton Keynes. Now, I didn't say yes. I said I can't make it. And then on the Wednesday, a couple of other people messaged me saying, can you come? And I remember being like, I can't make it. And on Thursday morning, I remember someone saying, dude, it'll be really good for your podcast. There's going to be a lot of people there. It's going to be really good for you. You should come. I went. So I finished the presentation with my team. I told them, I said, look, guys, I'm really sorry. I've got to go back to London tonight. I asked my teacher, I'm such a good girl like that. I went to ask the teacher, I said, is it okay if I go back to London tonight? Didn't obviously tell them it was for a bloody PR event. But I said, I need to go back to London tonight. And they said, that's fine, just come back tomorrow morning. It was snowing that day. I got in the cab, got to the train station. Mum came to drop the clothes in. I got changed in the toilet. I went to the event. I came back. I did the presentation. I left home the next day at 5 a.m. to go back to Milton Keynes. I did the presentation. Everything was fine. But it was that moment that I realized that something has got to give, because I cannot keep balancing my job and my work and my podcast. It's just going to be too difficult. Anyway, that was a story that I wanted to tell you. And that's really how I was feeling in May. I remember losing a lot of weight. I remember feeling very, very stressed. I remember at this time thinking, it's getting really hard. This is getting really, really tough, but keep pushing through, you're going to get through it. Also know that there were so many moments where I am so happy I had friends and family in my life to force me to do things. So the Anne-Marie concert, I love Anne-Marie more than anything, but my friend Vicky got me the concert tickets for my birthday the previous year. And I remember on the day saying to her, like, I feel really low. I don't know if I want to come. And she was like, look, just come for a bit and let's just see how it goes. Going to that concert helped me feel so much better. I was so burnt out. I was so tired, and just feeling free. And there's no reception in there. Not having my phone and feeling free for one night really helped. So I'm really glad my friends have forced me in that moment to do that. June. Now, I remember I was getting really good guests at this point on the podcast, guests that I'd wanted to have for a while. Unsure, amazing. I loved recording with her. And I remember I went to Marrakesh with my friends. Again, I do remember in that holiday for her hen not feeling present. I didn't have breakfast with them in the mornings. I was on my laptop. On the flight on the way back, I was the last one to get on because I was in the airport on my laptop. So I do remember at that point not feeling present. And that was over the long Jubilee weekend, so I didn't have to take any holiday. But Unsure was a very significant podcast for me, because I remember on that day also rushing from the office, coming to the studio in my work clothes with no makeup on, and having 6 minutes to go until the podcast started. Now, I remember seeing Unsure and she was waiting there and she was early. And I was thinking, oh my God, she's early. What am I going to do? And I was just honest with her. I was like, I'm really sorry. I've just come from work. Just give me 5 minutes. I've got to go get changed. Did my makeup, whatever. Recorded the most amazing episode. And straight after I had to jump on a Zoom call. Now, in that moment, I remember thinking, what a great conversation. There was so much to talk about. You could have formed a really great bond with this person, except the second you finished, you were busy with your job. And this was happening to me with several guests, unless I was recording them with them on the weekend, which who wants to record on a weekend? So I remember in that moment thinking, okay, this is getting really tough now and I need to do something about it. So I took a half day for every single podcast that I did, which meant that I had an hour before and an hour after to speak to the guests, to form a relationship with them, to talk to them afterwards, to be calmer, to not rush around, which I'm still rushing around, but to not to rush around as much and to get there a little bit early. And that was a really big learning curve for me. But it also really made me think, should I stay in my job? posting 6 times a week, and I had, Steph Fit on, which she had 1.7 million followers at the time. And I was thinking, why on earth is she coming on my podcast? I've only got 6,000 when she agreed to it. In June, I actually reached 10K. So that was a really also big moment for me, because I remember thinking, oh my God, I reached 10K. It was like the biggest life-changing thing for me at the time. But I also remember not feeling that happy on the day, because I was like, it doesn't really bloody mean anything. I still don't have sponsorship. I also still don't have sponsorship at 103,000, by the way. So just want to let you know that as well. So I do remember in that moment feeling like I am very, very, very overwhelmed. And I was being invited to so many PR events. I remember going to Nisha's Cooking PR event, and that was amazing. I remember meeting so many people there. And people at this point now are starting to really listen to the podcast. And I remember going to places and people would say to me, like, I love your podcast, which hadn't really happened before. No one was really saying that to me before. So this was really weird now that people were starting to say that to me. And I remember feeling really happy and motivated, and that was really good. But what I wasn't realizing is I was giving no time to myself. And my health was slowly deteriorating at this point. And I remember feeling really tired, but small things kept getting me going. Like a big guest would keep me motivated, or someone saying like, oh, your podcast is great, or people sharing it. All of these things kept making me so excited that I didn't really allow myself to feel tired. So my friend's wedding, my friend Ravi and Roshni, both of them are my friends, it was their wedding, and there was no reception at the wedding venue, and I couldn't upload my podcast. And I remember being so stressed out, and I had to ask the venue for their password and stand in the reception, and between their starters, mains and dinner, I was outside in between going to upload my podcast because I couldn't miss the registry dinner. But in between the starters, mains and dinner, I kept going outside. And I remember thinking that this is unsustainable, and I'm not present anywhere I go, on anyone's hens, anyone's weddings, anyone's birthdays. I wasn't really seeing my friends. It never really went out much anyway, but for things like weddings and birthdays, I had to be there, and I wanted to be there, but I wasn't really there. And that was another moment where I kept thinking, okay, what am I doing? Now, the reason I'm telling you all of this is I just don't want you to think that quitting my job was such a quick, sudden decision, because it absolutely wasn't. It took so many moments like this where I was questioning myself and questioning my values and questioning how present I was in moments and questioning my health. Because at this point, by the way, I'd also been on my period for a few months, and I genuinely think I was bleeding because I was stressed, not for any other reason. At this point, whilst like I said, all these small snippets were happening, I got an email from McKinsey. Now, again, how with Stephen Bartlett, I had so much self-doubt. With McKinsey, I had just as much self-doubt. I didn't really believe that the email was real, but it was. And anyway, just to summarize, I need to hurry this up now. I did a goal setting workshop at McKinsey, and it went really, really well. At that point, I started to think, okay, people are reaching out to me. What if I started reaching out to them? So that was another thing I added on my plate, was to do outbound for the workshops, outbound for the sponsorships, outbound for the podcast. And I just did feel at this moment that I'm not going to be able to do it anymore, am I? July was crazy because I was getting amazing guests in. And I remember at that point thinking, oh my God, my profile's growing. I'm definitely going to get a sponsor now. This is the answer to all my problems. That didn't happen. It didn't happen straight away. But what did happen is going to continue in part 2, because I no longer have any time left in the studio. I really cannot believe I have spoken this long about my year. I think I'm going to have to cut it back and talk around, speed this up, because I'm sure not everyone's going to want to see this. Maybe I'll have to do this in 2 parts. I don't know. But I'm going through everything in detail because I want to explain my whole journey to you and how everything really started to change. If you're interested to know the answer, like, comment, and subscribe for part 2, because I've spoken for an hour about half of my year. I cannot believe I've spoken for so long about half of my year. I'm going to continue a part 2. I'll be releasing that soon. So if you haven't, please subscribe, like, follow, and share this video with everyone you know who would be interested in knowing about my journey. Thank you so much to everyone who's been listening. I'll see you at part 2 at home.